The Marines rejected him. The Navy rejected him. He was 17 years old, 5'5", and barely 110 pounds, and every branch of the United States military looked at him and said no. So he lied about his age and got in anyway. 2 years later, wounded in both legs and completely out of ammunition, he climbed onto a burning tank destroyer that could have exploded at any second and held off an entire company of German soldiers alone. And that is not even the most surprising story on this list. One of the men you are about to meet lost his wife in a plane crash while she was promoting war bonds, and at 41 years old, enlisted as a private that same year. Another spent the war smuggling weapons to resistance fighters across the Adriatic Sea under a fake name while Hollywood believed he had simply vanished. These men did not play heroes for a paycheck. They put down their scripts, picked up rifles, and went to war for real. And the story waiting at number 1 belongs to a man so decorated that when Hollywood finally made a film about his life, the producers had to tone down what actually happened because test audiences said it was too extraordinary to believe. These are 10 Golden Age legends who were real war heroes. Number 10. Douglas Fairbanks Jr. Fairbanks was Hollywood royalty by birth. His father was silent film's biggest star, and his stepmother was Mary Pickford, America's sweetheart. He grew up surrounded by cameras and privilege on their famous estate. But when war came, Fairbanks did something nobody expected from a man of his background. He didn't just enlist, he helped invent an entirely new form of warfare. Commissioned into the Naval Reserve months before Pearl Harbor, Fairbanks caught the attention of British Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, who recognized that this actor's theatrical instincts could be put to devastating use. Fairbanks proposed creating a unit that would stage elaborate deceptions during amphibious landings, using powerful speakers, simulated landing craft noise, and smoke generators to convince the enemy that invasions were happening in places they weren't. The unit became known as the Beach Jumpers, and Fairbanks personally commanded it during the 1943 invasion of Sicily. His team created the illusion of a massive amphibious assault miles from where the actual Allied landing was taking place. German coastal batteries opened fire on ships that didn't exist. Italian reserves rushed to defend a beach nobody was attacking. Meanwhile, real Allied troops came ashore elsewhere and faced far less resistance than they otherwise would have. Fairbanks later described it in his memoirs as directing a deadly important show, except the critics were trying to kill him, and the reviews came in bullets. For his service across the Mediterranean, he received the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, and decorations from Italy, France, and Britain. He always said he was prouder of his naval service than of any film he ever made. The beach jumpers he created evolved directly into techniques still taught in special operations today. Number 9. Charles Durning. Durning was drafted in 1944 at 21 years old and assigned to the legendary 1st Infantry Division, known as the Big Red One. His first taste of combat came on the deadliest beach of the entire war. On June 6, 1944, Durning landed at Omaha Beach in the second wave. The man directly in front of him and the man directly behind him were both killed before they made it off the landing craft. Of the roughly 900 men in his company that stormed that beach, only 12 survived. Durning himself was wounded that day by a German landmine but returned to the fighting after treatment. 8 days later, during brutal combat in the hedgerows of Normandy, a German soldier bayoneted Durning 8 separate times in hand-to-hand combat. Durning killed the man with a rock. He was evacuated, treated, and instead of accepting a discharge, chose to return to the front lines months later, arriving in time for the Battle of the Bulge. During that battle, Durning was captured by German forces and marched toward the town of Malmedy, where he became a survivor of one of the most horrifying atrocities of the entire war, an event in which German SS troops opened fire on nearly 90 unarmed American prisoners in a snow-covered field. Durning escaped in the chaos. By war's end, he held the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, and 3 Purple Hearts. For decades afterward, he refused to speak publicly about any of it, saying that only those who had been there could understand. He didn't share his story in detail until he was 84 years old, at a national memorial concert in Washington, where he finally told the audience, "I was scared all the time. I never wanted to be a hero. Survivors aren't heroes. I was just a soldier." Number 8. Sterling Hayden. Before Pearl Harbor, Hayden was being marketed by Paramount Pictures as the most beautiful man in the movies. He had exactly 1 film to his name. Then the war came, and Hayden did something that stunned the studio completely. He walked away from his contract, enlisted as a private in the United States Marine Corps under his own name, and refused any special treatment. His maritime background, he had been a licensed sea captain since his early 20s, caught the attention of William Wild Bill Donovan. Head of the Office of Strategic Services, the wartime precursor to the CIA. Hayden was given a new identity, John Hamilton, and sent to smuggle weapons, ammunition, and agents to resistance fighters in Nazi-occupied Yugoslavia and Italy, operating small fishing vessels through German naval patrols in the dead of night. During one mission in late 1944, his boat was spotted by a German patrol near the Italian coast. Hayden ordered his crew to abandon ship and flee inland, where they hid for 3 days before being extracted by another covert team. By war's end, he had helped deliver more than 400 tons of supplies to partisan forces and received the Silver Star along with a personal commendation from Yugoslav resistance leader Marshal Tito. When he returned to Hollywood, Hayden said the industry's popularity contest suddenly felt unbearably shallow compared to what he had just lived through. Directors like Stanley Kubrick cast him precisely because his hardness could not be faked. As one director who worked with him put it, "Sterling doesn't act tough. He is tough. The camera just captures what's already there." Number 7. Clark Gable. When America entered the war in December 1941, Gable was at the absolute peak of Hollywood. MGM's highest-paid actor, fresh off the phenomenal success of Gone with the Wind. He had every reason to sit the war out safely. Then in January 1942, his wife, actress Carole Lombard, was killed when her plane crashed into a Nevada mountainside while returning from a war bond rally, a trip she had taken specifically to raise money for the fight against the very enemy Gable would soon face. Devastated, Gable made a decision that stunned MGM's studio chief, who desperately tried to arrange him a safe, non-combat commission. Gable refused. "I'm going in as a private," he reportedly said, "and I'll fight wherever they send me." He enlisted in the Army Air Forces at 41 years old and specifically requested assignment as an aerial gunner, one of the most exposed and dangerous positions on any bomber crew. Flying missions over Nazi-occupied Europe in 1943, Gable targeted heavily defended submarine pens and oil refineries where German fighters and anti-aircraft fire were at their fiercest. On one mission, his aircraft returned home with a 20mm shell hole that had traveled up through the floor, passed within inches of his head, and exited through the roof. 2 engines were damaged, and the tail gunner was killed. Making the missions even more dangerous, intelligence later revealed that Adolf Hitler had personally taken an interest in capturing Gable alive, reportedly offering a reward to any pilot who could bring him down and deliver him as a propaganda prize. When this reached the head of the Army Air Forces, Gable's combat flights were immediately terminated. The risk of losing Hollywood's biggest star to the enemy considered too great. By the time he was discharged as a major, he had earned the Distinguished Flying Cross and the Air Medal. He returned home visibly thinner, grayer, and according to those who knew him, carrying a sadness that never fully lifted. Number 6. Neville Brand. Before audiences knew him as a menacing gangster or a corrupt prison guard, Neville Brand was one of the most highly decorated American combat soldiers of the entire war. Born in Iowa in 1920, he enlisted in the Army nearly 9 months before Pearl Harbor, saying later that he had joined simply to get 3 square meals a day and stayed because it turned out he was good at soldiering. Assigned to the 83rd Infantry Division, Brand landed in Normandy just days after D-Day and was thrown immediately into the brutal hedgerow fighting that defined the early advance through France. As a staff sergeant leading a rifle squad, he built a reputation for both tactical intelligence and extraordinary courage. During one engagement, he personally eliminated 3 German machine gun nests that had pinned his entire company down, allowing the advance to continue. His most notable action came during the crossing of the Roer River into Germany, where under intense enemy fire he led his squad across in small boats, established a beachhead, and held it against repeated counterattacks until reinforcements arrived. For this he received the Silver Star, adding to a Purple Heart he had earned after being shot in the arm during fighting in the Ardennes, plus a Bronze Star and numerous campaign medals. By the war's end, Brand was recognized as the 3rd most highly decorated American soldier, behind only Audie Murphy and Matt Urban. He carried severe post-traumatic stress for the rest of his life, and close friend Lee Marvin, himself a combat veteran, once said that some part of Neville Brand was always still fighting, always still in danger. Brand later said playing villains on screen was almost therapeutic, giving him somewhere to put the darkness the war had left inside him. If you are enjoying these stories, take a second to subscribe to the channel. There are more real-life legends coming, and the next 4 names on this list include the most dangerous secret mission on the entire war and the single most decorated soldier in American history. Number 5. David Niven. David Niven was already an established Hollywood leading man in 1939 when Britain declared war on Germany, and he was the only British movie star working in Hollywood at the time to return home and re-enlist. The British Embassy actually advised most British actors to stay in America and continue making films for morale purposes. Niven ignored that advice entirely. He rejoined the British Army, transferred into the newly formed Commandos, and eventually took command of a squadron of an extraordinary and highly secretive unit known as Phantom, officially the GHQ Liaison Regiment. Phantom's job was almost unheard of at the time. Small patrols, sometimes operating dangerously close to or even behind enemy lines, tracked the exact real-time positions of Allied and enemy forces and radioed that information directly back to high command, giving generals a clearer picture of the battlefield than they could get through normal channels. Niven landed in Normandy days after the initial D-Day assault and led Phantom patrols that tracked German armor movements during the brutal Battle of the Bulge, and provided some of the very first reports on the discovery of Nazi concentration camps as Allied forces advanced into Germany. He also played a role in Operation Copperhead, a deception operation in which a look-alike actor impersonated General Bernard Montgomery to confuse German intelligence about Allied troop movements. Niven rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel and was awarded the American Legion of Merit by General Dwight the 500th, Eisenhower himself. And yet, for the rest of his life, one of the most famous storytellers in Hollywood refused to talk about what he had actually done in the war. When pressed, he would offer only one story, that he had once searched for the grave of a friend's son near Bastogne and found it among 27,000 others, and that those 27,000 graves were, in his words, 27,000 reasons to keep his mouth shut for the rest of his life. Number 4. Henry Fonda. In 1942, Henry Fonda was 37 years old, already an Academy Award nominee, and one of 20th Century Fox's most valuable stars, with a studio contract that could have kept him comfortably out of uniform for the entire war. Instead, he told his agent that he did not want to be in a fake war in a studio. He wanted to be in the real one. Fonda insisted on enlisting as an ordinary seaman in the Navy, refusing to use his fame to secure an officer's commission, believing any rank he received should be earned. The Navy tried to fast-track him into officer training because of who he was. He refused that too, at first going through boot camp like every other recruit before his abilities were eventually recognized and he was commissioned as a lieutenant junior grade. Assigned as a quartermaster on the destroyer USS Satterley, Fonda found himself part of the naval force supporting the American landings at Utah Beach on D-Day, responsible for navigation and ship handling during complex combat maneuvers while under enemy fire. Shipmates later said that most of them knew exactly who he was, and that he never once brought it up, insisting on being treated like any other officer aboard. After D-Day, his analytical eye for detail led to his transfer into naval intelligence, where he spent the remainder of the war doing classified photographic analysis work that stayed sealed for decades. He was awarded the Bronze Star. For the rest of his career, despite starring in numerous war films, Fonda almost never discussed his own service publicly, and director John Ford once said the only way you would ever know Fonda had served was spotting the small ribbon bar he quietly wore on his suit at formal events. Number 3. James Stewart. When Jimmy Stewart reported for induction in March of 1941, 9 months before Pearl Harbor, he was already an Academy Award winner and one of the most beloved stars in Hollywood. At 32 years old, he could have easily secured a safe assignment making training films. Instead, he insisted on combat duty. Initially rejected by the Army Air Corps for being underweight, Stewart spent months forcing down milkshakes and extra meals to meet the minimum weight requirement, finally passing by a single ounce. After training as a pilot, he persistently requested combat assignment until, in November 1943, he was sent to England to fly B-24 Liberator bombers deep into Nazi-occupied Europe. The statistics facing bomber crews in the 8th Air Force at that stage of the war were brutal. Less than a 25% chance of completing the required 25 missions without being shot down, killed, or captured. Stewart flew 20 official combat missions, with several additional unofficial ones that went unrecorded, often flying in the lead aircraft directly through the heaviest concentrations of German anti-aircraft fire and fighter planes. His commanding officer noted that after nearly every mission, Stewart was visibly shaken and sometimes physically ill from the stress, and within months his hair had begun turning gray while he lost roughly 20 pounds from an already lean frame. He kept flying anyway, refusing any offer of removal from combat duty until his cruise tour was complete. He rose to the rank of colonel by the war's end, one of the fastest promotions in Air Force history, and remained in the reserves for decades afterward, eventually reaching the rank of brigadier general. Unlike many stars, Stewart almost never spoke publicly about his combat experience, telling reporters simply that he had been doing a job like everybody else. Critics later noted that his post-war performances in films like It's a Wonderful Life and Winchester 73 carried a depth and darkness that had not been present in his work before the war. Number 2. Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin enlisted in the United States Marine Corps in August 1942 at 18 years old, already having been expelled from multiple schools for bad behavior. He later admitted that without the discipline the Marines forced into him, he probably would have ended up in prison. Assigned to the 4th Marine Division, Marvin saw his first combat during the brutal invasion of the Marshall Islands in early 1944. But it was during the invasion of Saipan in June of that same year that his war, and very nearly his life, came to an abrupt and violent end. Advancing against entrenched Japanese positions, Marvin's unit was caught in withering machine gun fire. He took multiple rounds to his lower body that severed his sciatic nerve and tore a 9x3-inch wound through him, narrowly missing his spine. He lay pinned on the exposed ground as a sniper's second shot landed just inches from his face. Of the 247 men in his company that day, only 6 came out without being killed or wounded. Marvin was one of them, barely. He spent 13 months recovering in naval hospitals, doctors telling him he had come within a fraction of permanent paralysis. He was discharged with the rank of corporal and awarded the Purple Heart, later saying bluntly that getting shot might have been the best thing that ever happened to him because it got him out of the Marine Corps and eventually into acting, almost by accident, after filling in for a sick performer at a small community theater. The authenticity Marvin brought to violent roles for the rest of his career came from having witnessed the real thing up close, and directors who worked with him noted he could correct actors on how to realistically hold a weapon or move under fire because, in his words, nobody who had actually seen combat would do it the way the movies usually showed it. Number 1. Audie Murphy. Standing 5'5" and weighing barely 110 pounds, Audie Murphy was rejected by military recruiter after military recruiter following Pearl Harbor. Too young, too small, too frail. The Marines turned him away. The Navy turned him away. Even the paratroopers said no. So his sister falsified an affidavit changing his birth date, and at 17 years old, Murphy lied his way into the United States Army Infantry. What followed over the next 2 years became, by most historical accounts, the single most extraordinary combat record of any American soldier in the entire war. Murphy first saw action in Sicily in 1943 and quickly rose from private to staff sergeant, then earned a battlefield commission as second lieutenant for repeated acts of courage under fire. But it was in eastern France, on January 26, 1945, that Murphy performed the action that made him a legend. His company faced an overwhelming German assault that included 6 tanks and waves of advancing infantry. With his men retreating under heavy fire and casualties mounting fast, Murphy ordered every one of them back to safer positions while he stayed behind completely alone, using a field telephone to direct artillery strikes onto the advancing Germans. When a nearby tank destroyer was hit and set ablaze, Murphy climbed onto the burning wreckage, which could have exploded at any moment, and seized its .50 caliber machine gun. For the next hour, wounded in the leg and fully exposed to enemy fire, Murphy single-handedly held off the German advance, killing or wounding at least 50 enemy soldiers while calling in artillery strikes dangerously close to his own position. When his ammunition finally ran out rather than retreat, he organized and led a counterattack that drove the Germans back entirely. "I was too angry to be scared," he later said, with the same understatement that defined him throughout his life. For this, Murphy received the Medal of Honor, joining a collection of decorations that already included the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and 3 Purple Hearts, making him, by the war's end, the most decorated American combat soldier in the history of the United States military, with 33 medals in total. When he came home at 21, his boyish face landed on the cover of Life magazine, and Hollywood came calling almost immediately. He went on to star in 44 films over 2 decades, most memorably playing himself in the 1955 autobiographical film To Hell and Back, which became Universal's highest-grossing film until Jaws arrived 2 decades later. But behind the fame, Murphy quietly battled what would today be recognized as severe post-traumatic stress disorder for the rest of his life. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow. He struggled with insomnia and became dependent on prescription sleeping pills. He rarely discussed the war publicly, and when he did, he deflected credit entirely, saying the real heroes were the ones who never made it home. Audie Murphy died in a plane crash in 1971 at just 46 years old and was buried with full military honors at Arlington National Cemetery. Per his own request, his headstone was left plain, without the gold leaf typically reserved for Medal of Honor recipients, identical to that of any ordinary soldier. His grave remains one of the most visited sites at Arlington, second only to President Kennedy's. 10 men. 10 completely different wars within the war. Some flew through flak over Germany, some crawled through hedgerows in Normandy, some operated in near-total secrecy under fake names, and one held off an entire company of enemy soldiers alone on a burning tank. All of them came home changed, and most of them spent the rest of their lives saying almost nothing about it. Now here is the question I want to leave you with. Of everything you just heard, which of these 10 stories do you think Hollywood could never have written on its own, even if it tried? And do you think today's generation of actors has anything close to what these men lived through before they ever stepped in front of a camera? Leave your answer in the comments. Subscribe to the channel, and we will see you in the next one.